I really don't want to understate how much of a problem saving glazes has become ever since certain things run out, because I'm really tuned in to like what mineral is what, because I talk to the people at the mineral companies. So like I have truly been saving ancient. I've been saving. Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? I am very excited to tell you that today we are going to be testing the new version of ancient copper from Amaco, PC-56 from Amaco, fired at cone 5.6. But Dante, I thought they stopped making ancient copper. They did, for like a year or so, actually. But it turns out they reformulated the recipe, and now we have a new ancient copper, so it's back on the market. Had to make a couple phone calls for this. Had to fight a dragon. Had to kill some other glaze companies just to get Amaco to send me this new version of ancient copper.
Yes, sir.
Oh dang, a second bottle? Amaco, when are we gonna stop messing around and just get married? For those of you who don't know the story behind ancient copper, every now and then it's quite normal for, well, I guess the planet or the mineral companies to run out of a specific material that is used to make a glaze that you really like. Because that's what glaze really is. It's really just minerals floating in water. You transfer those minerals by way of water into a bisque pot, they stick on the pot, and then you fire them, and a chemical reaction turns them into the super pretty glass that you like. But every now and then, we run out of a mineral that makes a specific glaze that we really like. So companies are forced to reformulate them. I don't know what mineral they ran out of to make this glaze, but I do know that it seems like they ran out and had to reformulate it, as is very normal. Even in my own formulations, I have to switch things around and substitute things and work around the chemistry all the time. Because of this, I have developed a very nasty habit of saving a lot of glazes that I hold dear and true to my heart, such as ancient copper. So I, in fact, have the old version of ancient copper as well. This is the original recipe, while this one is the new one. And in today's video, we're gonna see if the new recipe holds a candle to the old recipe. As we do on this channel, before we start actually testing things, let's talk about how we're going to test them, just so we can get some type of consistency on the channel. Firstly, I know that a lot of you like to brush your glazes, and a lot of you like to pour or dip your glazes. So, like myself, I'm going to be pouring on a white test style and a red stone or red clay test style. I'm also going to be glazing for you with a brush on a white test style and on a redstone test style. These are both cone 04 for bisque, and we're going to be firing them at cone 6 oxidation. In my experience, this glaze works best at cone 6. At cone 5, it makes this semi-matte kind of texture, but at cone 6, sometimes you get these beautiful crystals, as I have done in the past, and they are gorgeous. This is what people fall in love with when they talk about ancient copper. But the glaze does need to be relatively thicker than 3 coats, and you do need to fire it to cone 6. So these brush test styles here are going to have 4 coats on them, while these ones that I pour on will just be poured on, and that should be one and done. At the same time, because this glaze is so well known and illustrious, I'm going to be testing either the new or the old recipe on one of my dragon scale mugs that seem to be pretty popular on my online shop, some ramen bowls, and I will also be testing it on one of my Japanese tea bowls because I enjoy these and I have some extras lying around. So we're going to be doing a lot of tests. Okay, now that we're done glazing everything, let's go through our tests and show you what the dip versus the brushed versus the old versus the new versions are. Everything on the left over here is dipped and everything on the right over there is brushed, just for future notes. These two over here are two dragon fruit ramen bowls that I decided to brush. The one here is the new formula and this one here is the old formula. We will be putting them in the kiln next to each other just to see if there's a difference. You'll probably notice that on the inside I used the old formula, and that's just because I had a little bit left of one bottle and I kind of wanted to get rid of it. We will be putting these next to each other in the kiln, but the outside is primarily what we're going to be paying attention to when we do our actual review and it comes out the kiln. These two over here are both of our brown and white clay test styles. This is technically a stoneware being mixed with grog. All of these are coned at cone 04 for bisque, and they will be fired to cone 6 oxidation. These two here are brushed on. These are also both the new recipe. As for these ones here, they are made of the same clay bodies I just named, red stone here, and being mixed with grog right here, but these two are poured on with the old recipe. So we're gonna get to see the difference not only in between brushed and dipped, but also new versus old. Now we need a bit of control here. So I also poured this on. This is a stoneware beam mixed with grog clay body, and I stopped right there because this is a tea bowl and a lot of the times I like to leave the body raw. This is completely poured and dipped essentially. So I got a little bucket of it, held it upside down, rolled it around a bit, which is why these undulations here exist, and I poured the inside, rolling it out. So this is technically our poured on test style as well. This is my dragon fruit clay body with the new Amaco ancient copper recipe, completely poured on and then turned upside down and kind of dipped like the last tea bowl was. This is pretty neat for me because I get to see this run a little bit into the dragon fruit clay body, and I bet some of my patrons are going to love this as a gift when I give this to them as a brand new ancient copper dragon fruit clay body dragon scale mug. So I'm excited about this because I think this is kind of just for me. The one I think we should really pay attention to here is this teacup, and I've been making lots of these recently. You can see them on my Instagram, but this one is the old recipe, although it is poured on. So we have a really good variation here. And if we come over here, these are new recipe brushed, old recipe brushed, new recipe brushed, right? So we have a really good variation. As we go through these, I will put on screen which ones are which because we have about 8 pots here and it's gonna be difficult to keep track. With all of that being said, let's put them in that big old kiln. I'm sorry, I don't know why I said it like that. I deeply apologize. I'm just gonna put them in the kiln. I don't know why I said big old. I don't think it's offensive. I'm just saying it was extra flavor that wasn't needed. I'm just gonna put them in the kiln now. Okay, now that all of the ancient copper is out of the kiln, let's take a look in between the brushed on version, the poured on version, and the new versus old. Firstly, we're going to start with the brushed on versions, both new and old. This first bowl is a dragon fruit clay body with the new recipe of ancient copper, brushed on the outside specifically. This is a dragon fruit clay body, about 3 or 4 layers brushed on the outside. I also put the new recipe on the inside, but I poured that on, and you can kind of see a difference, especially on the outside. This looks pretty standard, but at this point I've been using ancient copper for so long, I can sort of tell a difference on the outside. It seems like the new recipe is a tad bit darker. Let's take a look at the old recipe on the same clay body, fired at cone 6, same exact kiln load, but brushed on. And just for a side-by-side comparison, this here is the old recipe of ancient copper, and this is the new one. I don't know if you can see it on camera personally, but this new recipe looks a tad bit darker. I also made sure to keep track of which one was brushed on with the old recipe versus the new recipe. And I hope that you can see it like I can. I might just be an ancient copper snob at this point, but the new recipe is a tad bit darker than the old recipe. It also seems to have a little bit less of crystal formation in it, but I think that might be copium. Now let's check out some of the other testers. This teacup is a brushed on version of the new ancient copper recipe on porcelain. This looks pretty good. For those of you who are wondering, the inside glaze is my Lake Laogai green that I had made, and this combo up here is the combo in between the two. So I dipped inside of my Lake Laogai green, and then I layered ancient copper, the new recipe, on the very top. And it came out kind of dope, actually. It makes this black kind of overflow here. Almost indistinguishable from the other older recipe. I can barely tell the difference, and like I said before, I think it's just because I'm an ancient copper snob. Now, when we look at the red clay test style over here, this takes a bit of a dramatic turn because this doesn't work as clearly as it does on a red clay body. This here is the new recipe brushed on with a red stone clay body fired at cone 6. And you can really see on redstone or brown clay, it struggles to make those little crystal blossoms that people like so much, that is iconic of the ancient copper recipe. On the white clay body, you can very easily see them. They're tiny, tiny little crystals, right? I don't know if they're zinc or what they are, but they're pretty good, right? But if you look over here, it struggles really hard to make that pattern of crystals. A little side-by-side comparison of the two clay bodies, the white and the brown redstone clay, you can really see the difference in between the two here. So I would definitely recommend at least a stoneware or a smooth clay body, if not porcelain itself, because that's how we're getting these effects that people seem to really be attracted to. Okay, we are done with the brushed on both old and new recipe. Now let's check out how we like our poured on glazes. This is the old recipe of ancient copper poured on. Pretty good, pretty good. I hope some of you can see what I'm talking about by this point when I say the old recipe is a tad bit lighter. Again, this is a poured on version of it, and usually my poured on glazes come out better than my brushed on glazes, but let me see if I can find it again, because I really hope I didn't chuck it. Oh, nope, I found it. But just check out the difference in between the new recipe and the old recipe, although this one is poured on. Right, you can see this one, again, and I'll stop mentioning it after this, is a tad bit lighter and has way better crystallization than this one here. You can see that this one has better separation of crystals as well as better crystallization. And keep in mind, I've had this glaze for about 2 years, so this is not a fresh glaze whatsoever. This is just the older recipe. Okay, let's check out our redstone test style with the old recipe poured on. Unfortunately, it met the same fate as the other brown test style that was brushed on with the new recipe. These look identical, essentially, other than the green glaze of my own on the very top. I think this is just a case of putting it on an iron saturated clay body because it doesn't make that purity of those little microcrystals that people really like in the glaze recipe itself. So while this is still a good glaze, it's still solid, matte kind of red, I just don't think that using brown clay is where it's at for the ancient copper recipe, regardless of whether it's poured on or brushed. Let's take a look at my favorite test style, which is the older version of ancient copper poured on a porcelain teacup. Okay, although I love this super nice metallic look, I put too much glaze on here. I will fully admit. You know how I know I put too much glaze on here? Number one, it ran off the kiln shelf. Yeah, I've been hiding this from you. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been hiding this from you. This is the only one that ran, and it's probably because it's on frost porcelain, number one, and number two, I poured it on, which equates to about 4 or 5 layers. For the majority of people who ask me why I pour my glazes on, I'm really just putting extra layers on there, and I'm doing a much quicker process than it is to brush it on. I get way better consistency, and I get more layers. Some people say I'm wasting glaze. I don't think it's a waste because I generally get better color than most people who brush on. It's not really a waste, I'm spending the glaze. There's a difference. And this happens to me in about 1 in every 100 pots where I just overestimate the amount of glaze I'm using. But to be fair, I poured this one on too, and it came out way better. These were traded exactly the same. I really think it's just the fact that I'm using frost porcelain, but this is the kind of color that I get when I pour stuff on usually. Secondly, I know I put too much glaze on there because you can see that there's a giant sheet of like crystalline alumina on there that has developed in this kind of mattish glaze to the point where it's ultra reflective now. Light is dispersing everywhere. Other than that, the old recipe's still kicking. Still pretty good, even when poured on. This test tile here is the new version of ancient copper poured on a dragon fruit clay body. Dragon fruit is one of my favorite clay bodies, mainly because you can leave half of the outside raw while taking care of the food safe parts. And it tends to look really beautiful when you put the right light glazes with it. I'll be honest with you, I do not like this. I think the new recipe should not be poured on. If I'm looking at all the tests I'm doing here, and I were to make a decision right now on whether you should brush or pour on the new recipe, I would say if you pour on the new recipe, it turns out a bit too dark for my taste, and that even echoes on the last test style. The last test style is on a stoneware clay body, and it looks pretty good. It's kind of a T-bowl that I had made earlier, but you can tell that it's a bit too dark for the type of ancient copper that I like. The inside looks great. The inside looks great, if I'm being honest with you. Let's get a little close up on the inside. The inside got those crystals that everyone likes from ancient copper, right? It looks beautiful. The outside, not so much. As I keep saying, this new recipe seems a tad bit darker. And this is also poured on the same clay body. You can clearly see one is a tad bit lighter. But I think to the untrained eye, these would essentially look like the same type of crystals. To me, these do not look the same. I prefer the older recipe, but I prefer it by like a tinge, just a tint of lightness. It seems to me throughout all the tests that we've done, right? And this is poured on the old recipe. This is poured on the new recipe. This is the old recipe here. These two are both the new and old recipe. I'm pretty sure this one is the old recipe while this one's the new recipe. Okay. Brushed on new recipe and brushed on new recipe, and then we take these over here and these are the old recipe. So these over here are all the new recipe right here, and this one over here along with its counterparts are the old recipe. And like, I feel like I'm just trying to convince you that the old version is a bit lighter, but please tell me in the comments below. Like, you can see this, right? These three testers versus oh my god, these 3 testers over here alone, hell, even 4 with the darker clay body, are all technically lighter than this entire group over here. And that lightness really counts when I'm trying to look for those type of blossoming microcrystals that ancient copper is known for. So I'm gonna go ahead and say that I prefer the older recipe, but the newer recipe isn't really that bad. It gets the job done. It's just personally not light enough for me. And please keep in mind, most of these are the same clay body, the same kiln load. They are also the same temperature, and most of them are glazed in a variety of ways, both poured on and brushed on. And almost every one of these turns out to have a darker variation when we talk about the new recipe. I'm keeping this one. You can't have it. I'm keeping it. I'm keeping it. I didn't even glaze the oh yeah, I did glaze the bottom. Okay, we might put it on the website then if I glaze the bottom. Are they aware of this? Because like, I see this is a bit darker than this is. Can't be the same picture, right? Like they have to know. Even the glaze is darker. No, you know what? I'm getting conspiracy theory. We have to stop. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today of the test for the new recipe for ancient copper PC-56 from the Amaco company. It was truly a pleasure to test out these 2 glazes. I might do another test later on, but if I were to give you one final suggestion for the new recipe of ancient copper, I would use 3 to 4 layers and I would brush it on so that way you don't get an overage of glaze so it doesn't get darker than it usually is. But if you're using the old recipe, and you're one of the people like me who just kind of pour stuff on and make sure you have enough space at the bottom to make sure it doesn't run like this, I'd say go ahead and pour it on. The glaze itself is still a banger even if you have an old version of the recipe. That being said, thank you, Potters, for watching. Remember to click all these 2 buttons because Amaco is going to come for me in my sleep after this video. They're coming for me, and clicking the like button is the only way to make sure that I stay safe.
Thank you for your patronage.
This is for ancient copper. The test, everything on the left is dipped, everything on the right is brushed. Well, actually, everything on the left is dipped, everything on the right is brushed. We're gonna have to put them in special places in the kiln.